Hello everybody and welcome back to A Court of Words and Pages. My name is Natalie. So today I have my March wrap-up. March was a pretty okay reading month for me. It wasn't great, but it wasn't also my worst. It was better than February. I think I read 10 books and I DNF'd one, and I enjoyed most of the books I read. There were a few that I didn't enjoy as much, but I had a lot of upper 4.5, 5-star reads, which is always good. I definitely think I do have to admit, though, I am in a reading slump, not necessarily a short period one where it's like you just don't read for a while. It's one where reading hasn't become my first thing I do whenever I have spare time. Instead, I'm going on my phone, watching YouTube, watching TV, and I really do want to get back to reading more as my first thing to do when I'm bored, because I love to read. It's a passion of mine, and I do these other things thinking, oh, I could be reading. But of course, I'm not reading, I'm doing something else. So I want to work on reading more in my spare time instead of going on my electronics, because I like reading. The first book I finished in March was The Gilded Ones, which is by Roshni Chokshi. This book is a really hard one to even after having read the book, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, because there's a lot of layers to this book, but it's this alternate history fantasy that's set in Paris in 1989, and we follow Severin, who's this really wealthy guy. He owns a hotel, but there's also a certain level of a mystery to him, because for the last years he has been hunting down artifacts to try to blackmail that Order of Babel, which is kind of like the ruling governing figure in this world. It's kind of confusing because he's after his inheritance. The Order of Babel basically tells him, hey, you help us find this artifact and we'll give you your inheritance back. So he has to team up with his crew that he's been working for the last few years, his closest friends and all that jazz, and they have to try to find this artifact. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, which looking back is probably a bit generous. There were definitely problems with this book, but I was just so in love and enamored by the atmosphere and the characters that I was just completely willing to overlook that. My main problem probably did lie with the magic system. It just really wasn't well explained, and there was a few too many parts to it, because there was like house magic type stuff that came kind of from the history of this world and how like the alternate history came in, but then there was also like magic people individually had, so it was kind of confusing. But I really did enjoy this book. I think the strongest points of it are its characters. This book is really compared to Six of Crows a lot, kind of in the high story with a gang of thieves and like a misunderstood leader, and I think some of the comparisons are valid, but these are two completely separate books. But like Six of Crows, I really enjoyed the characters. I think they're a great kind of crew, and they all have really interesting personalities, and they each have their own motives to work through. Something I found that I always kind of struggle with high stories, but I didn't struggle with this one, is that I could keep track of everyone. I knew who everyone was, and I could just kind of pinpoint, okay, this is this, you want this, and all that cool stuff. The ending of this book was really explosive. The book kind of ends on this cliffhanger, so I'm really excited to read the sequel, The Silver Serpents, which just came out last year in 2020, so I'm excited. I really enjoyed this book, and yeah. The next book I read was a bit disappointing, and that was Tiny Pretty Things by Danielle Clayton and Sonia Sharapotin. I'm pretty sure that's how you say her name. And so this book is set at an elite ballet school in New York City, and we are following Gigi, Bette, and June, who are 3 students there. Gigi has just transferred there after a spot was vacated at the school, and the story is really just the backstabbingness of these people and fighting to get roles in the ballets and all that fun stuff. So this was a book I read 3 years ago almost, and I knew it wasn't like quality fiction back then, but I was not expecting to dislike it as much as I did. Obviously, this book does hold a lot of nostalgia for me. It's a favorite of mine. It's been one for so many years, but I couldn't look over some of the flaws. The characters just seemed so naive, and none of them were likable, really. I'm not someone who hates books with unlikable characters. I mean, they don't usually tend to be my favorite, but God, some of these girls, I couldn't even look on their side in some of the cases. Everything just felt incredibly petty, and I didn't like that. There were multiple romance plot lines threaded throughout the book, and I thought most of them were pretty sloppy. I didn't enjoy the romance aspects really at all, which is actually interesting, because I remember the first time I read this book, I really enjoyed a romance that blossomed between Gigi, who's kind of like the main character, I'd say, and wanted the boys at the school, but I just didn't care for it because I didn't like the person that she got into this relationship with the second time around. Everything just felt incredibly rushed and you couldn't really see a connection forming. So I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. It should maybe be a bit lower, but nostalgia is influencing this one, and I'm definitely going to continue and reread the sequel. I don't remember what it's called, but hopefully I'll like that one better because this book did kind of end on this cliffhanger. Not even a cliffhanger, but like a big moment. So I'm excited to see where the sequel goes. Next up, I read what was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and that was Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. So I love Angie Thomas. I've read everything she's written basically, and all of her books are favorites. I didn't love Concrete Rose as much, unfortunately, but I still really enjoyed it. So Concrete Rose is a prequel to The Hate U Give, and it's following Star's father, Maverick, as he finds out he's a father and has to kind of deal with the fact of, does he still want to be in the gang that he's in, or does he want to try to leave, and just kind of navigating being a father, being in a gang, trying to be with his girlfriend, and all of that good stuff. I didn't necessarily love this book as much as I had hoped to, and it's not that this book isn't good, going into it, I expected Maverick to be the same character he was in The Hate U Give, this wise father figure. He's not that in this book, which, I realized kind of about halfway through. Of course he's not going to be Natalie. This is him figuring out his life, him struggling, making mistakes, and trying to become the person he eventually is. So obviously he's not going to be the character that you loved from The Hate U Give. He needs to get there. And after that kind of clicked in my brain, I started really to enjoy the book more. But I think the one thing I didn't like about this book as much is there was much less of a plot in this book than in other Angie Thomas books, which is fine because this is really just kind of Maverick's journey. But I do think I enjoyed the plots of some of the other books more, and I just think if there had been a bit more happening, some aspects of it, I would have enjoyed that. But it was still a really good book. I gave it 4 stars, and I will still continue to read anything and everything Angie Thomas writes. Next up, I read one that I wasn't quite sure what I thought about it while reading it. I'm still not quite sure what I thought of it, and that is Spilling Silver by Naomi Novik. So, how to describe this book is a question that I'm not quite sure. So, we follow Miriam, who gains a reputation across her kingdom as she takes over for her father as a debt collector because he's not doing her job for being able to turn silver into gold, as she's just very good at getting people to pay their debts. And her reputation reaches the King of the Stark, who are these kind of mythical creatures that are just known for coming across into the human world and taking silver and just ravaging the land. And the king basically sets an impossible challenge for Miriam. And this kind of web that starts to create also starts to weave in a servant girl who starts to work for Miriam's family, and the daughter of a lord whose father is trying to marry her off to the Tsar. But there's also a mystery with the Tsar, and these webs of plot lines all get woven together. And that was really the amazing thing about this book. The way that Naomi Novik managed to weave these webs of storyline together was absolutely magical. The writing style in this book was just so whimsical, and it truly transported you to this world. I really enjoyed the characters. I thought they were, you don't really get to know a lot of them, but they're good and they're really interesting characters. The plot is actually really interesting. That was something I wasn't expecting, but it was really interesting, and while it did definitely drag in some parts, I did keep reading consistently, and that was really good. I didn't love the ending of this book. That's kind of where my enjoyment faltered a bit. There was a little case of kind of insta-love type thing where I just didn't see the romance. I didn't see it develop really at all, which was quite unfortunate. So I did give this book 4 stars. I will continue to read Naomi Novik's books. I think I'm going to pick up Uproot It next. So yeah, I enjoyed that book. Next up, I read Burn For Me and White Hot, which are the first 2 books in the Hidden Legacy series by Ilona Andrews, who are a husband-wife writing duo. So the series is like paranormal, urban, fantasy, mystery. It's a lot of fun, and I just sped through these books really fast. So these books, we follow Nevada Baylor, who owns a PI detective company, and we're in this world where, in like the 1800s, scientists created a serum that gave people magic. So this serum was outlawed after a bit because it was a bit too dangerous, but kind of in this world, there are different houses that have magic, and it just creates this whole other politics system that's very different from the politics we have in the US today. So this book takes place in present day, as Nevada has to track down Adam Pierce, who has like fire magic, and he is rampaging around the city trying to kill people, and there's also a mystery of what is he trying to do. And she ends up teaming up with Mad Rogan, who is an ex-military man who has lots of power and loves money, and they team up together to try to figure out where this man is. And romance starts to blossom between the two of them, as Nevada's really the only person who can get under his skin. So, despite what the covers and kind of the synopsis may think, this first book in the series is not overly romantic. The first book really does focus on building the chemistry and the tension between the two characters, as well as into the second book. That's what a lot of that happens. And then in the end of the second book into the third book is kind of romance and like relationship stuff. I really enjoyed this series, or what I've read of it so far at least. I gave both the first books in the series 4 stars, which I think are very fair ratings. I could probably bump them up to 4.5 stars. I may have to think about them because I really enjoyed these books. They're fast-paced reads. The mysteries in them are really good. Kind of at the end of the first book, we discover a bigger mystery as to like why this man is doing what he's doing, and it kind of continues and unfolds into the rest of the series and becomes the main plot line, which I think is pretty typical in a lot of books. But the mystery is really intriguing. I just finished the 3rd book, and I'm still very hooked, very invested, ready to continue on with the 4th and the rest of the series. And I just think these books are just really good. The characters are fun. Nevada's a really fun character. Mad Rogan is an amazing love interest, and just also a great character. I think he has kind of just some depth, and he's not the person you first think he is. So I enjoyed this book, and I'm very excited to continue on with this series. Next up was one I thought I was going to love more, and that was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So I talked about this book in my series I Want to Start video, which I will link down below, and I was just very underwhelmed by this book. This book is another kind of alternate reality, like alternate world book, and we're set in a world where there are 4 alternate Londons. There is Grey London, which is our London, Red London, which is flourishing with magic, White London, where the magic is fighting for control with the people, and then Black London, which no one ever talks about. And we follow Kel, who is an Atari, and he can travel throughout the Londons, and he works for the King and Queen of Red London, but he also smuggles things in between Londons, which is illegal. And one day he comes into the possession of this mysterious stone, and he travels with it to Grey London, where he meets Delilah Bard, who is a thief, and she steals the stone from him, and thus their paths are intertwined in a quest to save the world. So I just found this book to be very average. The characters were average, the plot was average, the interactions just between everything, the world building even was average. I really did lack a lot of character motives, and I didn't care really about any of the characters. Nothing that V.E. Schwab did with these characters or given me their stories really made me care about them or want me to root for their success. I mean, obviously I was like, yeah, I don't like the bad guys and I want the good people to win, but I wasn't personally invested in the story, which I felt was really sad. I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series just because I thought it was quite average, but I am kind of interested in it to see where it goes, and I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I'm going to talk about is a DNF, so I'm not going to linger on it too long, but that was A Flame in the Mist by Renee Audier. This book is kind of a Mulan retelling. Who we follow our main character, I do not remember her name, as she is traveling to go meet some guy in the capital city that she is going to marry. She's engaged to be married with him, I think, and then as she's traveling, her carriage is attacked, so she basically has to go undercover as a boy in this clan and try to figure out who tried to kill her. I did not like this. I did not care for the characters. I made it about 50% through the book, so I think I gave it a fair shot. I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care about the plot. I did not care what the main character was doing. She very much saying this, I'm a strong, independent girl. Yep, that's me. Strong, independent girl. And I just didn't feel like it. It felt like tell, not show, like they were telling us. And there were some other plot lines that were being woven through, and I was just confused. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like the writing. I didn't enjoy it, so I decided, you know what, I'm not going to read this. On to the next. And the next next ended up being one that I really enjoyed, and that was The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. So in this book, we follow Vasilisa, who kind of lives in northern Russia. Growing up, Vasilisa has been told stories of the household spirits who protect the world and help keep things in balance. But eventually, Vasilisa's father remarries to a woman, and when her new mother comes to live with them, she brings a priest and is very set on basically getting rid of these spirits and switching everyone over to Christianity. But as Vasilisa becomes one of the only people in her village who still believes in these spirits, she figures out that basically the lack of belief in these spirits are allowing a greater force to rise up, and that's going to try to come and kill everyone. And she has to fight back. So first off, the wintry vibes in this book were amazing. I loved them. I loved feeling like it was winter. Vasilisa was a really enjoyable character to read about. I thought she had a lot of personality. We kind of follow her from when she's literally a baby to when she's mid-16s maybe. And you really see that she wants to be a loving daughter. She wants to be obedient, but she just can't bring herself to do that. This is her nature. It's who she is. I really enjoyed this book. The plot was really intriguing. I liked it. I don't know really what else to say. It was just a good book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next up, I read Fable, which is by Adrienne Young, and we're following Fable, who is the daughter of a big time merchant, except for a few years ago, he basically left her on the coast of an island and said, bye, try to find your way back to me, and then we'll talk again. And so we follow Fable as she is finally able to pay West, who is kind of another merchant, for passage off of this island to go and find her father. Except for her father is not really who he was anymore. He's now extremely powerful, and she also finds that West, this man that she paid for passage, is not who she thinks he is, and then they end up having to team up to go find something, and I think that's what I'm going to tell you. So I really enjoyed this book. I wasn't expecting it to be good. That sounds bad, but I definitely enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I would. I really enjoyed the sea setting. I think that's something I do enjoy in books, so I'll have to look for more books that have that. I thought Fable was an interesting character. I liked Wes. There's kind of a romance that sparkles between the two of them, and I liked that. The ending of this book was really interesting. I just found it was really fast-paced and kept me engaged, which is good. And I'm very excited to pick up the sequel, which I think just came out. So, good book. I enjoyed it. It helped me read. And then the final book I finished this month is absolutely a new favorite of mine. Actually, the only book I read this month that got 5 stars, but that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So in this book, we follow Rin, who is a war orphan, and she's been adopted by these people who work in the South as kind of shopkeepers. And Rin finds out that she is being basically kind of sold off in an arranged marriage, and she does not want this. So she decides she's going to study for the test that kind of lets people get into different military academies in the Empire. Rin has to get into the top military academy because that is the only one she can go to for free without having to pay tuition. But no one thinks she can do this. She is a poor girl from the South, uneducated, but Rin ends up getting into this academy. When Rin gets to this academy, her struggles continue. She is ostracized for being poor. She has darker skin than everyone else at the academy, and she really has to fight hard to fit in and to keep striving. And as she studies here, Rin discovers that some people in this world have the power to call down the power of the gods, and that Rin may be one of these people. In the second half of the book, the Empire is invaded by a neighboring federation who they have been in war at for multiple years, and Rin and her classmates quickly have to abandon the academy and start to fight in the war. The main thing that this book does is juxtapose the difference between training for war at a military academy and actually being in war. All these petty grudges that you had against your classmates, they don't matter anymore. What matters is trying to stay alive. This book was brutal. Yep, R.F. Kuang was not afraid to do that, but it wasn't kind of as bad as I thought. The battle scenes were not terrible. Anyone who really has heard anything about fantasy within these last few years in the Poppy War knows that chapter 21 is this horrible part of the book that's just brutal and devastating, and it definitely is that. I thought I wasn't going to be able to read it, but I ended up being able to read it because it wasn't brutal and kind of the way I thought it was going to be. I definitely would recommend looking at trigger warnings for this book. I mean, there's drug addiction, rape, murder, war, racism, everything. Pretty much almost every trigger warning you can think of is in this book, so definitely be sure to look it up and kind of look up where in the book it is if you do want to continue to read this book. I thought the characters were super well developed. Yes, sometimes I got very frustrated at them with the choices they were making, but you could always understand why they were doing that, and you always knew what they wanted. You could always tell what their mission was, which I think was really good. The ending of this book was really interesting. There's kind of something revealed kind of towards the end, and it made me really eager to pick up the second book, The Dragon Republic, so I'm really excited to do that because I really enjoyed this book. So those were all the books I read in March and my star rating and kind of what I thought about them. I had a pretty good reading month. I'm hoping to read some more books in April and try to get some more 5-star books because that's really what we want when we read, isn't it? Thank you guys so much for watching. Down below you'll find links to all the books I talked about today, as well as my Bookstagram and my Goodreads if you want to follow me there. Tell me in the comments down below what books you guys read this month, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!